By Juyi, The Song of the Lute, with a preface. In the 10th year of Yuan He, 816, I was demoted and sent out from the capital to Yujiang as assistant prefect there. The following year, in the fall, I was seeing a friend off at Fengzhou one evening when I heard a lute player on one of the boats. Listening to her music, there was in the way she strummed her lute a subtle flavor of the capital. I asked about her and learned she was originally an entertainer in Chang'an. As a girl, she had studied the lute with the two masters, Mu and Zhao. When she grew up and her beauty faded, she had given herself to a merchant as his wife. Hearing that, I called for more wine and asked her quickly to play a few more tunes. When she finished, she sat with a sad look on her face. She told me about her happy childhood in the capital and about her hard, sad life now, endlessly wandering from place to place on rivers and lakes. I had already been away from Chang'an for 2 years, passing my life quite pleasantly. That night, moved by her story, I felt for the first time like someone who had been banished myself. So I wrote this long poem as a gift for her in all 616 characters and gave it the name The Song of the Lute. At Xunjiang, I was seeing off a friend. Red maple leaves and white reeds rustled with the sound of autumn. I got down from my horse and joined my guest on his boat. We raised our cups and began to drink, but without the sound of song. Drinking didn't make us happy, so sadly we made our goodbyes. The moon was sinking slowly in the stream. When we heard, from the darkness on the river, the sound of a lute, I hurried back, and my guest delayed his leaving. Searching the source of the music, we called out to the player. The lute stopped, and in a while we got our answer. Then we moved our boat closer and invited her to join us. Pouring more wine, relighting the lamps, we revived our little party. We called to her 1,000 times. She finally appeared from the darkness, still half concealing her face behind her lute. She turned the pegs and tested her strings. Even before she began to play, these sounds moved us. The strings ran with a low and mournful sound, as if to share with us all the disappointments of her life. With lowered eyes and steady hands she played, her music emptying her heart of unbounded sorrows. Lightly brushing, strumming softly, bending and plucking the strings. First the song Rainbow Dress, then Green Waistband. The low strings rang out boldly like a hard rain falling, and the high strings softly whispered secrets. Low and high she wove together as she played. The sound of pearls, large and small, poured into a jade basin. The orioles singing beneath bright flowers, then water bubbling from a dark spring and running down through pebbles. Then the spring stopped flowing, as if the strings grew mute. Frozen, the flow stopped, all sound dying away. A different kind of hidden sadness, a dark regret was born, in a silence yet more beautiful than the sound had been. Then, as if a silver vase had burst, water splashed, a geyser. Iron cavalry charged forth, swords and lances clashing. She ended the tune with one bold stroke across the lute. The 4 strings rang out as one, like ripping silk. Those in the boats to the east and the west were silent, not a word as they gazed upon the autumn moon, white in the river's heart. Thoughtful as the sound faded, She slid her pick between the strings, straightened her dress, and stood, face somber. Then she told her story. I was a girl of the capital. My family lived below Frog Mound. At 13, I mastered the lute. My name ranked first in the Imperial Office of Music. Each piece I played, teachers praised my art, and my beauty was envied by all the other women. Rich young men of Wuling competed to give me gifts. One tune brought so much red silk, I couldn't count the rolls. I snapped fine hairpins and silver combs, just tapping out the rhythm. Stained silk gowns the color of blood, wanton, spilling wine. I lived for the moment, had no thought of the next. Happily savoured autumn moons and spring breezes as they passed. Then my protector was drafted, and my madame died. Evenings went, mornings came, my beauty faded. My gate was deserted, all traffic stopped. Grown up, I married myself to a merchant, who cared more for profit than for constancy. A month ago, he went to Fuliang to trade in tea. Since then, I have lain in the river mouth in this empty boat, tethered to the bright moon and the cold river. Late at night, I dream of my childhood. My own weeping wakes me, my makeup spoiled by my tears. Hearing her lute had made me sigh. Hearing her words made me groan. We were both bereft here at the ends of the earth. Meeting this way, should it matter we were strangers? And so I spoke. I left the capital last year, banished here to Xunjiang, often lying sick in my bed. Xunjiang is just a country town. There are no real musicians here. The whole year I haven't heard the sound of flutes or strings. I live near the Fen River, in a low, damp place. My house surrounded by yellow reeds and rank bamboo. And there, what do I hear from dawn till dusk? Cuckoos' blood-filled calls and sad apes crying. Spring flowers of the morning, or evening's autumn moons, I always watch alone, pouring and drinking and pouring alone. Yes, there are songs in the hills and flutes in the villages, but they are rustic and tuneless. It's painful to listen. Tonight, when I heard your lute speak, it was like the music of the spirits. My ears felt pure again. So, our story's finished. Please sit and play us one more tune, while I write down for you this song of the lute. Moved by what I had told her, she stood quietly for a while. Then she sat again and tuned, and played again. This time the rhythm quickened, yet the song was sadder than before. When she'd finished, all the guests were weeping, faces hidden in their hands. Of those present, who wept most? Bai Juyi, assistant prefect of Jujiang, his blue gown soaked with tears. So, we have another poem by Bai Juyi, and like the previous one, it's quite a long one, not as long as the Song of Everlasting Sorrow, but quite a long poem as well. So, what is the topic of this poem? Well, this poem is pretty straightforward. It's not too dense, not too dark. And I believe there might be reasons to believe that, as the poem itself states, it was composed impromptu, we could say, by Juyi on the occasion of which he is talking about in this poem. So, as you've heard, basically the preface also explains the context and the situation. Bai Juyi is in exile and in a provincial backwater town where he is the assistant to the prefect. And he's making a party, a farewell party for a friend, when suddenly he hears a beautiful music from a lute in the river where the partying is taking place. And he and his friend find the source, which is a woman, They convince her to play music for them, and then finally each tells his or her own story. The lute player tells about herself, about how she was a good musician in the capital, but now is the sad woman of an absent husband, who is a merchant, and by Juyi, whose feelings of loneliness and sadness and of being far away from the capital have been rekindled by this episode. Bai Juyi also tells his own story of a scholar official in exile and feeling correspondingly desolate and sad. So the main topic of the poem, I would say, is nostalgia, sadness, lamentation for being far from the splendorous world of the capital, whether it be in the lutist's lament at her delightful youth in the capital, whether it be by Juyi's recollection of the time when he was serving also in the capital. It's clear that both voices in the whole poem are a lament for that happy time when everybody was young and when they could live the courtly culture of the very cultured Chang'an instead of being, like in the present, in a backwater provincial town, languishing. Music is also a very important topic of this poem. We've encountered poems on music before and on the power of musicians. We've encountered also descriptive attempts that through images, both visual and oral, recreate what a piece of music may inspire in the minds or in the hearts of the viewers. And music was very important in Chinese tradition, in Chinese political thought, not only for aesthetic reasons. Music was considered an almost divine art that helped to create harmony. In a way, it was the correlate of ritual, which also helped to create harmony, but through the maintaining of rigid hierarchical relationships, whereas music had more of a pleasant, a pleasurable, and a universalist kind of streak. It also regulated its harmonies in a rigorous way with the notes and the tones and everything, but it creates in the public a happy feeling of commonality and union. So the power of music, the beauty of music. And yeah, I would say those are the main topics of the poem. The poem is a narrative one, so we get the story mostly of this woman, which is a sad story, and this matches up with Bai Juyi's predilection for telling stories of the lower classes. Now, from what the poem depicts of this woman, this anonymous lute player was an entertainer in her youth in Chang'an. Now, entertainer is a very ambiguous term. I imagine she might have been a prostitute or probably a hetaira, and scholar officials of the time had very little moral qualms at engaging with prostitutes. Now, these prostitutes, in fact, one of the most famous quarters was quite close to the university and the imperial palace. These prostitutes and entertainers were a bit like the Greek hetairae, so they were expected to be cultured women. They were the ultimate object of male desire because they were beautiful, they were artistically inclined, they could hold up an intellectual conversation, they could sing, they could dance, they could play musical instruments. So they were the ideal source of entertainment and the ideal object of desire for the scholar officials from a frivolous perspective. So, in the depiction of the life of this woman, which is idealized, I don't know, well, we'll comment on that later perhaps, I don't know how much to believe. I don't think it was such a pleasant life to be a female entertainer in Chang'an, although I might understand that the hardships of old age and of an arranged marriage and of a lonely marriage at that, and nostalgia for youth and the gilded life with the rich and powerful in the capital might exercise, its fascination over people. Anyway, those are the main topics of the poem, as I said, and I would divide it into basically 3 parts. So there is a first section, which includes the introduction with Bai Juyi and his anonymous friend drinking and lamenting the respective departures when they hear the music. And then we get, in the same part, we get the two managing to persuade the lute player to play for them. And the description of the wonderful effect the music has on the listeners. A second part would be very clearly demarcated by the girl's story. So after she stopped playing, and at the requirement of Bai Juyi, this young woman tells her story. And the last part would be Bai Juyi's own story, with a little appendix, a conclusion, which states how sad they all are, but especially the poet, the poetic persona, Bai Juyi. Okay, let's go bit by bit now. A couple of, not a couple, well, yeah, a couple of ideas more to introduce. Where is the scene taking place? So this is in Xunjiang, which I imagine is a town. The area is also described as Fengzhou, and probably the prefecture of Zhejiang, 9 rivers. So we're talking about the center south of China, probably the region, the middle course of the Yangtze River Valley. So the area of the old state of Chu, in an area that has appeared already as a place of exile in previous poems that we've encountered, in some of them. Yeah, for example, the ones by Han Yu about being at Mount Heng, or with Administrator Zhang Shu. Second thing, the poem is called A Song of the Lute. I imagine this in Chinese is Pipa Chi. No, not Chi is a record. Pipa, well, Pipa song. And an important thing to clarify, we've seen lutes referred to in poems before this one, but translators generally equate with the same term, lute, two very different instruments in China, in Chinese tradition. The instrument we've heard most about in previous poems which was called the lute, was what the Chinese call the qin, which is more appropriately, but probably less poetically, translated as a thither. So it's a small horizontal board of wood with some strings on the top and without any frets, I think. And it makes a very quiet, subdued sound. And this was the instrument par excellence of the scholar officials. The one that is mentioned here, although it is also translated as lute, is the pipa. Now, the pipa is more like the real lutes that you might remember from the European Middle Ages, the Arabic Middle East, or from the Renaissance and the Baroque. So these big-bellied, guitar-like instruments. And they were an import from China. We don't know exactly when they were introduced in China, but even at a relatively late stage of Chinese history, as the tang, it was still perceived as a type of a foreign instrument, not as decorous and native as the qin, and one very adequate for entertainers. And we have lots of paintings also in Buddhist caves and sanctuaries from this time, which depict immortals, which look Indian or exotic, playing these lutes. Okay, then let's go and let's start analyzing the poem bit by bit as usual. So the first stanza describes before the music, what is the context, what is happening, which is basically Bai Juyi is sending off a friend who's going off somewhere, perhaps the capital. At Xunjiang, I was seeing off a friend. Red maple leaves and white reeds rustled with the sound of autumn. I got down from my horse and joined my guest on his boat. We raised our cups and began to drink, but without the sound of song. Drinking didn't make us happy, so sadly we made our goodbyes. The moon was sinking slowly in the stream when we heard from the darkness of the river the sound of a lute. I hurried back, and my guest delayed his leaving. So pretty straightforward. There's this party. It's a sad party because there's no music. Music is so important for all Chinese social events. So the party is going to finish early, but suddenly a lute is heard in another boat close by, and this changes everything. Second stanza. Searching the source of music, we called out to the player. The lute stopped, and in a while we got our answer. Then we moved our boat closer and invited her to join us. Pouring more wine, relighting the lamps, we revived our little party. We called to her 1,000 times. She finally appeared from the darkness, still half concealing her face behind her lute. She turned the pegs and tested the strings. Even before she began to play, these sounds moved us. So again, not much to comment here. After much insistence, after finding the source of the music playing, and after much insistence, They convince the lute player to come out and play for them. And even before she starts playing music, only by strumming, testing the strings, she already starts to move them. Such is the power of music. So now begins, in the next stanzas, we get the description of the effects of the music. And as I said, we get a juxtaposition of oral and visual images, which in a way mm, mm, try to communicate, the changes in the tempo, the rhythm, the rises and downs of the notes, the melody, and so on. The strings rang with low and mournful sound, as if to share with us all the disappointments of her life. With lowered eyes and steady hand she played, her music emptying her heart of unbounded sorrows. So two things. One I didn't mention. The poem is under the generic tone and sign of sadness and melancholy from the very beginning. It's autumn. The context for the poem is it's autumn, which is the season of sadness and melancholy, and two friends are parting. The music that is being produced and that starts ringing is also a sad, melancholy music, which is only adequate to match the feeling of the poet and of the poem. Remember what I said about music. Music is very important, and the Chinese believed that music was a way of exteriorizing the emotions of the soul. Both poetry and music are a way of pulling out what's inside, the feelings that one has, and by releasing them, finding a sort of consolation. So it's a bit of a dam metaphor, yeah. Like you open the dam and let some of the water out so that the dam won't break. So sadness. The two friends at the beginning are sad. The woman who is playing the instrument is obviously sad because the music she's creating is sad. Lightly brushing, strumming softly, bending and plucking the strings. First the song, Rainbow Dress, then Green Waistband. The low strings rang out boldly, like a hard rain falling, and the high strings softly whispered secrets. Low and high she wove together as she played. The sound of pearls, large and small, poured into a jade basin. Then orioles singing beneath bright flowers. Then water bubbling from a dark spring and running down through pebbles. Then the spring stopped flowing, as if the strings grew mute. Frozen, the flow stopped, all sounds dying away. A different kind of hidden sadness, a dark regret was born, in a silence yet more beautiful than the sound had been. Then, as if a silver vase had burst, water splashed, a geyser. Iron cavalry charged forth, swords and lances clashing. So we get a whole juxtaposition, as I say, of many, many different images. Almost all of them have an oral element, but they're strongly visual. So rain falling, the low strings, whispered secrets, the high strings, big and small pearls pouring into a jade basin, I imagine representing the high and low notes. Orioles singing beneath bright flowers, the cheerfulness, the brightness, maybe of a nice melody or pattern. Water bubbling from a dark spring, running down the pebbles, probably a grrr, 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 a strong, pulling, moving sound. Then silence, and this silence creates expectation and a deeper sadness. And then the silence is broken again, as if a silver vase had burst, a sea of water, and a warlike image, iron cavalry charging forth. Okay, so the music is going to come to an end. She ended the tune with one bold stroke across the lute. The four strings rang out as one, like ripping silk. Those in the boat to the east and the west were silent, not a word as they gazed upon the autumn moon, white in the river's heart. Thoughtful as the sound faded, she slid her pick between the strings, straightened her dress, and stood, face somber. So finishes the musical concert, at least the main part of it. And now we get a story. Why is this musician so poignantly sad, and why does she play with this melancholy and this heartbreaking feeling. Well, this is her story. Then she told her story. I was a girl of the capital. My family lived below Frog Mound. At 13, I mastered the lute. My name ranked first in the Imperial Office of Music. Each piece I played, teachers praised my art, and my beauty was envied by all the other women. Rich young men of Wuling competed to give me gifts. One tune brought so much red silk I couldn't count the rolls. I snapped fine hairpins and silver combs, just tapping out the rhythm. Stained silk gowns the color of blood, wanton, spilling wine. I lived for the moment, had no thought of the next, happily savoured autumn moons and spring breezes as they passed. Then my protector was drafted, and my madam died. Evenings went, mornings came, my beauty faded. My gate was deserted, all traffic stopped. Grown up, I married myself to a merchant who cared more for profit than for constancy. A month ago, he went to Fuliang to trade in tea. Since then, I have lain in the river mouth in this empty boat, tethered to the bright moon and the cold river. Late at night, I dream of my childhood. My own weeping wakes me. My makeup spoiled my tears. So the woman is sad because she hates her current life. She led a relatively golden life in her youth. She was trained to be a musician, and she was one of the best, if not the best, in her trade. She entertained the rich and the powerful, and she enjoyed an ongoing flow of riches, cash, and luxury, so much so that she became extravagant. As she tells in the poem, she had no thought. Living for the moment, I had no thought of the next. And we get a description of how she wasted many silk gowns with wine stains and how she broke silver combs and hairpins just for fun's sake. But all things must pass. Her beauty fades away, her protectors die, and she is forced to find another means of living, and she decides on marrying a merchant. Not a wise choice, it seems. The merchant doesn't think much about her, and he has left her in this boat while he is presumably dealing with trade in some far region, but probably enjoying himself with younger sing-song ladies who are not his wife. And merchants are universally despised in almost all of the poetry of the Confucian scholars. So this represents very well their set of values. Confucian scholars have an intense loathing for riches, at least in theory, and a special loathing for merchants. In the Confucian social hierarchy, there was an order. The lowest of the low, the worst of classes were the merchants. They were below the peasants. They were below, of course, the scholar officials. They were below the craftsmen, and they were below the shopkeepers. The merchants, the traveling merchants, were the scum of the earth. People that only lived for money, and people who had no roots and who traveled far and wide. And there were also people with money. I imagine cash-strapped scholar officials would have looked enviously and angrily at these rich merchants living lives of relative opulence aboard the ships. But anyway, the scholars hate these people, and they always take a jab at them whenever they can. And this is an example. So this woman is married to a merchant, the worst sort of man, a person who is ruthless, who is always taking her to one end to another end of the empire, and who doesn't seem to be loving her much anyway. Hearing her lute had made me sigh. Hearing her words made me groan. We were both bereft here at the ends of the earth. Meeting this way, should it matter, we were strangers. So, in a way, the scholar official, however much a distance might separate him from this sing-song lady of the lower classes, he feels he's one with her. He feels he is like her. Of course, it's a metaphor, but the scholar official is like the rejected belle who used to play at the capital. He is the scholar official who used to be in the capital and respected. Hearing of her story has awakened Bai Juyi's sorrow for his own story of exile and marginalization and life in the provinces. And that is what we're going to hear next. So next is Bai Juyi's story. And, he isn't afraid of talking with her, even though they are strangers, because they share so much in common, in his opinion. And so I spoke. I left the capital last year, banished here to Xunjiang, often lying sick in my bed. Xunjiang is just a country town. There are no real musicians here. The whole year I haven't heard the sound of flutes or strings. I live near the Fen River, in a low, damp place. My house surrounded by yellow reeds and rank bamboo. And there, what do I hear from dawn till dusk? Cuckoos' blood-filled calls and sad apes crying. Spring flowers of the morning, or evening's autumn moons, I always watch alone, pouring and drinking and pouring alone. Yes, there are songs in the hills and flutes in the villages, but they are rustic and tuneless. It's painful to listen. Tonight, when I heard your lute speak, it was like the music of the spirits. My ears felt pure again. So, our story's finished. Please sit and play us one more tune while I write down for you this Song of the Lute. So, no complaints at not being able to serve. This seems a pretty Epicurean take for a scholar official, and even more so for one of Bai Juyi's mettle. So he's basically saying, this is my second year in exile. I'm here in this backwater hole in the middle of nowhere, in this rustic land, far away from the civilized life of the capital. I can't enjoy music here. There are no musicians, or at least you only have the rustic bumpkins playing tunelessly horrible melodies. I have to live without music. I have to live in relatively uncomfortable conditions, as being sick and in a house that is in a low and damp place with wild vegetation surrounding it. I can't enjoy the beauties of nature or wine drinking because in this in this far away remote place there are no scholar officials like me to enjoy their company and their conversation. But tonight I've been able to transcend or to forget all this by hearing your heavenly music. So I'm going to write down a poem for you based on our encounter, and please do play a little bit more. And so the conclusion. Moved by what I had told her, she stood quietly for a while. Then she sat again and turned and played again. This time the rhythm quickened, yet the song was sadder than before. When she'd finished, all the guests were weeping, faces hidden in their hands. Of those present, who wept most? Bai Juyi, assistant prefect of Yujiang, his blue gown soaked with tears. So the poem ends again in a mournful note. The musician plays another tune, but it's even sadder, if possible, than the previous one. And Bai Juyi is the one who's crying the most, combining the pangs and the anguish at the sad music, at the musician's background, and at his own background. So, quite a sad, melancholy piece, but with a lot of beauty and with a love of music and an enhancement of its power and its effects all throughout.